G'day and welcome back to my channel. Now, what has progressed with the Stingray? Well, it doesn't look like much, does it? I've still got the cabin here and there's nothing much added there. What have I been doing? Well, there's a lot of paint out. That might give you an idea. And there's also a whole lot of styrene over here. I have been scratching. And what have I scratched? Can you believe that? Those are the control panels for inside the cabin there for the Stingray. They're the Portside ones this time, because I made the starboard one in the previous video. Now these have taken me quite a bit of work to do because they're fully three-dimensional and they're as close to what the control panels look like in the actual TV show, but mine are much tinier. The actual TV show, they would be 10 times larger than what I've had to make, because I'm only working in 1/72nd scale. So my guys that will be in it would be that tall, whereas the marionettes were good handspan or more high in the making of the TV show Stingray. Anyhow, I thought I might show you what I've done so far with these, because the council's cutting off my power tomorrow. No, I paid my bill. Yeah, I did. No, they're upgrading and doing some work in the street, so I have no power. So I won't be able to do any more work, scratch work, for a couple of days until that's sorted out and a few other things done. So in this video, I'll show you how I made these very, very colourful little control panels which fit inside the cabin there for the Stingray. Well, I hope that sounds like it's something of interest to you, and we'll be getting on with that shortly, just after we roll the music. So that's where we got to in the last video, and I had created this fairly simple shape here, but then jazzed it up with a few little panels and things, and painted it up, and that, as far as we know, is the radio. We don't know how they actually get to it, because their arms couldn't reach that far across the panels. We think they get to it from underneath here and use big sticks to make it work. Who knows? It's all make-believe. Anyhow, in this video, as I said, I'm going to make the other control panels that go here. And the first job in doing that is really working out a plan. And it is necessary. It makes it so much easier later on. So I've sketched up from the photos. I've looked at all the photos that I have from the TV show, worked out the sizes. I mean, I already know a lot of relative sizes from the last video. I'd say go back and watch that last video if you want to see how I accomplished that, turning the photos into working drawings. And I explained all that. So from that, I've worked out this is the rear Portside panel, and it'll be 6mm high, 6mm wide, and sort of these are all things. And I've marked where all the colours are. So I did all that. And then that's the front panel. And it has a screen and some speakers and a few funny things, and and a big control panel there. And again, I've worked at all the colours. It's sort of a greeny, sort of grey kind of colour, which I ended up using a mix of the light green that I've been using in this, right, RLM 83, and then I mixed in probably equal portions of this little sand grey, which is RAL 7027, and those two together eventually, I mean, I used my lovely little colour palette thing, eventually I ended up with sort of this colour here, which is what I felt was close to what that metallic sort of green interior. And then I've used my other colours that from the previous video, the dark compass ghost grey. I've used that consistently all the way through for all the greys, and I've introduced this time a field blue that I've got, which is sort of a dull sort of blue colour, which is rather nice in contrasting here and there. I'd sort of used that, I think. Yeah, I had used that. I had used a field blue in that one, so it is continuous colour. I've tried to keep the colour palette fairly consistent all the way through, because I felt that was important, that always we sort of had the same look, even though these panels on the port side a bit different. There's a little bit of red in them for a start. We didn't have red in the other ones, and there's a bit of yellow as well, but it all come together nicely. All right, so let me show you how I created the shapes and put them together, and then how I painted them up so they actually turned into lovely little miniature control panels. Now we start on the construction. I've already worked out all my pieces, and it's a simple matter then of assembling. Now all the pieces I cut much larger than they need to be, but doing them in 2mm plastic at least for the major parts, worked a lot better than trying to build the whole thing out of 1mm. Anyhow, let me move on. Side bits go on, and it's a bit fumbly and fiddly, yes. This is so small, it really is. And trying to work in thin plastic proved really hard, so I moved to this thicker plastic, which at least gave me a way to hold it. And you've got to make sure you get the right bit on the right bit there, Harry. Okay, so glue that on there. There we go. So we've made a sofa. Oh dear. Dear, dear. Get glue everywhere. I get glue. It's just like being a kid. I get glue all over my fingers. I really do. Okay, so there we go. So I'm showing you this because it's not as, it doesn't just fall together and perfect and simple. It is fiddly. It is difficult. Now, once I've got the pieces in there, you can see I'm sort of tapping it down with the tweezers there until everything lines up, because it's as you saw, it's so hard to get things to actually straighten and fit. Once you've got that basic shape done, fitting in the desk part, right, the actual panel, is a lot easier because you've got a nice, firm, solid thing to work with. And even here, I'll sort of keep adjusting it, making sure at all times everything's level and lined up. Because once it's glued, I mean, there's a bugger then to fix, because if you've got it wrong, it's just too hard to go back and sort of correct it all. Now, I opted to just put 0.5mm little sort of facings here rather than try and build that entire sort of U-shaped cutout thing. I had tried to do that previously, but it was just too hard. So I felt it was easy just to do that, because by the time it was inside the Stingray, that's about all you're going to see. So it didn't really matter. So there we go. That one is not too bad. Now, the other one actually is easier. Now, I'd sandwiched together two 2mm blocks on either side to make, the sofa ends. See? These two little things here, because they're 4mm wide. This is why it's good to have your drawing. Then you kind of can keep referring to that all the time. What fits where and how fits this and who goes to who and what's up what. Yeah, it's pretty important because you kind of get lost in all these jumble of pieces. Because remember, you got no instructions. You're scratch building. You're just making it up. So again, checking all the time, trying to get things level. It's hard because it's so small and it's so fiddly, but you just keep working at it. And the beauty of the contactor glue is I've got time to sort of play with things, times to do things. And as long as your measurements have been fairly exact, it should all start pushing together and lining up. So there we go, we've got the panel in. Now here's this little U-shaped thing. That was just a little inspiration. I'll just cut half a little round U, and look, that creates the binnacle, close as I'm going to be able to do, for this panel. And the top pieces there, which I did end up shaping down later, I'd made them full round for some reason here. They actually should have been half rounds and then tapered. And I fixed that up later. But anyhow, here we go. That's how she looks. Pretty happy with that. Well, after a couple of attempts, I have managed to make something like that, at least the basic shape, and that one there. So actually, I thought that'd be the more complicated one, but that actually proved to be the easier one. Now, the reason why is I first tried doing it using 0.5mm scratch sheet and building up a box like I had done with the one that I built previously, and yeah, that's okay, except this has got sort of these little arms here and then folds in, and I did it, but it doesn't really look that good. I mean, it really didn't hold together well. So then I realized I've got 2mm plastic, and these arms are 2mm and these ones are 4mm, so it'll be much easier to use the 2mm plastic, even though you're working at tiny pieces, so I had to cut them slightly oversized and sand them down. But that worked out really well, because then we ended up with those, which are as close to spitting the kind of shapes we need. And with a bit of paint up, they're going to look spot on. So if I sort of break it down from what you saw in the video, this is just a bookend, 2mm wide. And then the back piece is 2mm wide. So that basically got that whole thing done really quickly. And then I used thinner 0.5mm pieces to get the shape of the desk and to face out the front. And it's still not perfect, but it's better than what I had. Like if you compare those two, that one's just a lot rougher. That's okay. Once that's painted up and some dials and things are on it, it's going to look fine. And similarly with this one, even though it looks more complicated, it's actually the easier of the build. I sandwiched together two 2mm pieces and then made my little trapezoid shapes, right? And then again, I put the back on it. So I'm just making a sofa, right? You're just making a sofa. And then I put the shelves in, And for my instrument binnacle, I just cut a bit of round tube and just made a half circle there and stuck it on. The top were rods, round rods that I cut at an angle diagonally to create one of those silly little red things are. I think they're speakers. So that gave me my two little pieces, and they're not too bad. You've got to cut it oversized and then you sand it back to shape. Even when I assembled this, it was still a bit rough, and it really only got its final shape once I sanded the whole thing down and got the thing to shape. Then I put on all the round bits. So yeah, all things. I heard my friend Becca said he knows someone does a lot of scratching, and he always says he builds 3 versions. Yeah. First one to sort of see how it goes and maybe reject that idea. Second one to sort of test an idea. By the third one, you got to figure it out. And that can happen. So don't be discouraged if you're scratch building if your first one doesn't turn out. Just think of that one as a learning and have another go, or maybe change to different width plastics or rethink the logic of the breakdown. So that's how I got those. And as I said, they fit in very nicely on there. So now what we need to do is paint them. As I said before, these little guys I actually remade because I don't know how I got it in my head that they were full circles. They're only like little half circle sort of speakers that pop up. So I eventually ended up cutting these little guys off and then remaking them as like half a rod, half a circular rod, and then tapering the ends. But there you go. That's sort of how they would have been painted anyway. Now the binnacle, this is the bit that really pops out. Thunderbirds and Gerry Anderson and all that sort of stuff, they use a lot of red. There's lots of red and everything. I mean, you know, you normally probably in real life wouldn't have this much red, but they try to put a lot of red in the control panels and bright colours and greens. So there you go. That was that. Now, a bit of a touch up here on this one still. Yeah, the thing is you go back and you touch things up. Now, there's a couple little kick plates at the front here, so I've scratched off a bit of the paint so that I can now put my glue on. And I've already made up some tiny little 2mm by 4mm kick plate panels. I know. It's just ridiculous. These things are so small. But there you go. And I found the best way, they were even too small for my wax pencil, it's better to put them on the end of a knife, you know, of my blade, and then just tap them in. So those are those. They fit nicely, and that solves that problem and creates a nice little bit of sort of a feature. Otherwise, that sort of panel is kind of devoid of detail. It just looks like a sofa to me. Yeah. Now, the next thing that I want to do is create these little sort of there's speakers and buttons and things, okay? Now, one way that I use is a styrene rod, okay? And you dip it carefully in your paint and make sure there's no furry edges on it. And then you tap it on and you get a large dot, which is kind of handy for speakers and round things. For the tiny little buttons, I use a toothpick, same sort of method, tiniest bit of paint on there, and you just tap down and you get a whole lot of buttons. There we go. Made a whole lot of buttons on that one. And sometimes you can rest the toothpick against some part and then you can kind of line up, which is helpful. Although I've pushed a bit too hard, those buttons are far too big. I came back and I remade those later a lot smaller. But that's the thing, if you can find something to rest against or some way to get your eye, you can get those buttons to all line up. Now, this is a trick. The big dots, which we did with the styrene rod, we now use a toothpick to put a little silver dot in the middle. So they look nice. Fortunately, some of these look a bit wonky on camera now, I know. That's because I was working with a camera in my face. I did go back and fix them up later. I used the big rod to get the basic shape and then come back later and tap in the small toothpick to get the small shape. I did some more work and I revised a few things. I lowered the those little speakers or whatever they are there. They are semicircles, not full circles I had. I added lots more buttons. I fixed up a few more of the little buttons on there because when I was doing them, shooting the video, I couldn't be as accurate as I wanted to be. Big friggin' iPad in my face, So, yeah, I kept working on them, revising them and getting them as accurate as I could. Well, accurate for something that's totally sort of make-believe. Now, I have tried to put these in here and take some photos. So that's how they would look sitting inside the cabin there. But of course, over that will be this sort of clear plastic part. Right, but you can still sort of see them in there. Yeah, they're in there. In fact, I've taken the photos here that you can have a look of. And that's inside with the clear part put inside here and with a light underneath. You can see that everything is visible. And that's just putting a light of my iPhone on and shining it up through the guts in the middle. And still we can actually see the control panel. So when I actually light it correctly in coming videos, we're going to put a little LED inside here, so that actually will give illumination from the top and fill up the whole cabin with light. That should really help in that we'll be able to see right through those windows and we will see those control panels. So I've probably taken them a bit further than you needed to, but as is my want, I really enjoyed making these, and just to get those shapes was a challenge. As you say, I went through a couple of different iterations until I worked out the best way to make up those shapes. And I've simplified them a bit from the actual ones in the show. I had to, otherwise I was going insane. And then that trick of using toothpicks and a styrene rod, which you paint up and then tap, 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 and that gets you the larger circles and then the smaller points and dots for the buttons. That's a nice trick to know. You can use that on so many things. So painting with toothpicks is a clever way to get some detail. In fact, that's how we used to do a lot of that sort of detail on the ships, trying to pick out all the things in the back of them, all the filigree and all the gold and stuff. Before I got the Posca pens, the Posca pens meant that you could actually use a pen to do it, a tiny nib. I tried a sort of Posca pen with this one, but Posca pen's better if you can sort of run it along a little shape, whereas here I just had a flat surface and I got a tiny little dot, and I didn't have as much control with my Posca pen as I thought I would. But the old toothpick and styrene rod method works perfectly. Now, these styrene rods, you can buy a whole set of different sizes, which is what I've done here. So, I've got various sizes. I don't seem to find that little thin one that I was using. But there were quite a few in here. There were about 7 of them to start with. And that wasn't much at all. It was only less than a shekel. And they have proved invaluable. I've just about used them all up now. So they're really good when you're doing scratch work because you've got all those different circular forms and you can cut pieces out and make all kinds of shapes. So I hope that was of interest to you, and that's how I've used some simple materials from my drawings. I mean, a lot of it's in the drawings, right? A lot of it's in planning and working it out. So I know that kind of seems boring, but working out a plan and working out what you want to make, that gets it in your head what shapes they are. And once you have got those basic shapes together, it's just a matter of painting it and it comes alive. And suddenly, out of nothing, you have this detailed, intricate and interesting part. I love it. I love it, It is very satisfying, rather than just cutting off something off a sprue and painting it that someone else has done all that work. You've done it. You've done everything. You've created the thing. You've worked it all out. You've worked out how to paint it. There you go. All right, well, that's about all I can say for this video. Look, if you're enjoying the sort of stuff I've done, please hit the like. That would be really helpful. Comment, just be nice about it. Subscribe to my channel. You'll get to see more of these sort of things that I do. And I will be getting to other things like the sailing ships and some other stuff soon, so don't worry. There'll be a variety of stuff coming up. I've just kind of been on a whole bender here doing the interior of the Stingray and having a little ball. So, yeah, and you can always basically join Patreon and YouTube members, and that really helps me out. Don't forget that super thanks. You can hit that, bang, yes. It's a big help. And any donations you like to buy me a curry, yeah, that would be good. Helps feed Bass the cat as well. She does enjoy a good fish curry. All right, well, that's it. It's goodbye from Australia, and it's hooroo from Harry Houdini.